A warm welcome to the How Hebel am Ufer, a warm welcome or a good morning here at Berlinale Talents. We are very pleased to have you here with us today on Wednesday, which is already in the midst of our Labors of Cinema topic. You know that we are debating work or labor or however you want to call it from very, very different angles this year. And if we do that, when we do that, we speak a lot about our passion, we speak a lot about how we make film work and how film is done. But at some point we thought it's also very, very important to speak about the financial part of it, the income. In a way, work as something you earn money with. Because in the end, for many of the talents, it's also a job. Or for most of them, I would say. And for us in Berlinale Talents, it's always very important to listen to you, our talents, and also to connect you with other fields, other disciplines around the world of film. And for this, for today, we've been preparing quite well, I would say, because you have had a questionnaire, and you will hear more about that. I won't go into any detail here at this point. And we also invited people who are interested to get to know the talents and also share their knowledge. And for this, I'm very happy that we connected the worlds of film with the worlds of science. And for this, we had a wonderful woman with us over the last week. This is Skadi Lois. And Skadi Lois is the professor from the Filmuniversität Babelsberg Konrad Wolf. And her full title is Professor for Production, Culture and Audiovisual Media Industries. And if you hear that title, you already see where the connection is. So without any further ado, before you are introduced to our other guests today, let's welcome Skadi Lois. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me into the whole process, basically, Florian. Welcome to today's Berlinale Talent session, Paid with Passion, Talents and Their Finances, which I have the honor to moderate. As Florian already said, this session ties in with this year's overall theme, Labors of Cinema, or as the poster splits it up, Lab Hours of Cinema. So I feel like this today is a bit of a lab where we talk about our cinema and the labor in that. And we're trying to, look at all dimensions of film and labor in that, in specifically the economic situation of the filmmakers. And as Florian already said, for that we came up with a talent focus survey where we asked about the income and education and the outlook into the future, which we're gonna hear about a bit more in a moment. With the findings from that, the survey as backdrop, we're going to have a conversation first with the two fabulous expert guests left to me. Professor Dr. Jutta Almendinger in the middle and Lisa Basten, with whom I will talk about several key themes that also emerged from the survey. So number one is going to be talking about the impact of missing diversity. So what does it mean if there aren't enough diverse voices on set and also in the film funding structures, gatekeeping positions? That's one topic. Another one is the significance of education and training. So, what is, like, in what way is it a positive factor for impact, for income, sorry.
Impact as well.
Yeah, as well. So training, education is another element we're going to look at. So the first two will also going to be topics, I think, that relate very much to Jutta Almendinger. The third one is talking about regulation of income. So what kind of models are there already existing in terms of asking for minimum wage or standard contracts, support systems for artists, representatives and unions, and so on. And the fourth is also relating to the title Paid with Passion. So we're also looking at alternative currencies in the creative sector. So what kind of value do those alternative currencies have, but also what kind of risk are topics that we're going to look at. So our two guests here, our experts, have a lot to do with these topics. That's why we chose them, obviously. Professor Dr. Jutta Almendinger is president of the Berlin Social Science Center at the WZB and also professor of sociology at the Humboldt-Universität. She has very many positions. One is that she served as head of the Federal Employment Agency Institute for Employment Research in Nuremberg a few years ago. She, in part of her multiple honors and awards, include the German Federal Cross of Merit First Class. She has an honorary doctorate of the University of Tampere in Finland. She serves on several advisory boards in Germany and abroad. She's a member of the Berlin-Brandenburg Academy of Sciences and Humanities and the German National Academy for Sciences Leopoldina. And one part that I find very interesting also for today is that she also has had contact with independent filmmaking firsthand because she was interviewed by a protagonist in the movie The Long Summer of Theory by Irina von Alberti that came out 2017. As I hinted at already, one of her long-term topics in research the impact of education on career developments, also gender equality topics. So those, as I mentioned, two of the key themes that we come to are covered very well, I think. Our second guest, also perfectly equipped to frame the other two topics, alternative currencies and income and labor structures. Lisa Basten is head of the Arts and Culture Department at the German labor union Verdi. She studied sociology, comparative literature, and has a degree from the film school in Babelsberg. She has published a book, Wir Kreative, We Creatives, about the self-image of an industry, which exactly ties into the alternative currency topic. From 2016 to 2020, she was a research assistant at the WZB with Jutta Almendinger. And she's also a member of the Labor and Social Affairs Expert Committee of the German Cultural Council. She also has two kids, and I'm very grateful that you're here because one of them has a birthday today.
Oh, congratulations!
Thank you, 10 years.
So a little later, and I already see some on my extra screens here, we'll be joined by 2 rounds of talents for each that we're going to bring into the conversation to ground that in direct experiences around the world. Altogether we have 90 minutes, so we have a lot to talk about, I think, and I'll start with giving a few results from this survey and walk you through the questions that we asked and what kind of answers we actually got. So we asked all 200 talents that hail from 70 countries to provide a look into their finances, all anonymous, of course, as this is a precarious and sensitive topic. We asked about their finances, contracts, and training situations, and wanted to hear about the hopes and fears about the futures, and also talk about best practice examples, how to change the film industry for the better. Of those 200, 145 talents from 61 countries have responded, and nearly from all the departments that are taking part in talents. So we have answers from actors, cinematographers, composers, distributors, editors, film critics, production designers, from a sales agent, screenwriters, sound designers, and the largest group, because they're also the largest group in talents in general, were from directors and producers. In terms of gender distribution, it was fairly even. 52% women replied, 46% men, and we also had a couple non-binary people reply, so we already see diversity showing up in the survey. The age range was between 22 and 58. The average age is 34 of the people that replied, but that's also the same for talents in general. We also asked about their experience, so for how long have they already been working in their profession, and specifically on a professional scale being paid for that, and that we had a range between 1 year and more than 15 years, with an average of 6 years already working in the profession. The next thing, and we know that is quite often an issue in the film industry, or probably not only in that, is what kind of contracts are there actually. So we found out that half of the respondents work as freelancers, 11% have fixed-term labor contracts, only 8% have permanent contracts. 1/3, and that was actually surprising to me, have no written contract. 4% out of those have no contract at all. And a quarter, so 26% have only a verbal contract, which, yeah, to me was surprising to have that many people working on basically good faith. In terms of the gender distribution in relation to contracts, there was one little nuance when we looked at who works without a contract or only with verbal agreements. And interestingly, there were more men working without a contract or without a written contract. And I was wondering why that might be, whether they are, more used to taking risks. That's at least a stereotype in the industry, that it's male masculine to work with risk. Also, the film industry is known for taking risks. So that was interesting to me to see that. Apart from in the other contracts, there weren't big differences. Now, the most sensitive question was income. How much do they actually earn? And we had a pretty big range. We asked, how much money do you earn per month in US dollars, so that we can compare that. And the answers ranged between nothing at all and $9,000 a month, which is quite a good salary. Nothing that I would earn ever. The average is 1,600 US dollars, which is a very interesting term, and because 1,600 US dollars might mean something very different here in Germany or in the US than it would be in Cameroon or in Pakistan, or other places where our talents come from. We tried to look what that means in terms of an average national income, and we found out that 46% of the talents overall earn less than their country's average monthly income. So that's quite a bit, and means even though the average seems to be an okay rate to earn, that quite a few are indeed in precarious positions. We also found something that's not too surprising, that the gender pay gap that has been talked about in different industries is also visible from our survey. Another interesting thing, though, is that, and we'll come back to that, that ties into the issue of the contracts that we had, that several also said it's kind of hard to estimate when you are supposed to say what the average income is when you have no regular income, as in you are a freelancer, you work project-based, you don't have the same income every month. And I'm sure we're going to come to that topic later on. One other thing that we try to look at is that the income ranges, and basically that is true for all the questions we had and the answers, that there are no direct tendencies that we can see in terms of a distribution around the world. So we find people who have a lot of experience or little experience have worked with or without contracts for very little money or an okay salary in all parts of the world. So we can't, pinpoint that there is a specific area, regional area, or also department where that would be different. So maybe that's also an interesting finding from the survey. So we talked about contracts income. The next thing we asked is, can you actually live from that? Like, how much does your income cover your living expenses? The good news is that at least 40% said, yeah, they can fully live off their income from their film work. However, every fifth talent can only do so to 3/4, so 75% of their living expenses is earned, paid through their film work. On the other hand, it's calculated together, 40% earn less than half of their living through film. So, that means there is quite a bit of room for improvement to be able to actually live off your profession. If they can't live off that, what do they live off? Is the next question we asked. Like, do they have specific bread and butter jobs, what we call that? And where would that be? Around half of the talents that responded said, yeah, they have an additional different job. And the biggest group of that, 27 people, said they have some sort of teaching job, often related to their profession. So, they might teach editing or film analysis and so on. Quite a few have other closely related jobs that are also film related. So several talents have a second profession. If you're a director, you might also be able to edit or work in cinematography. So that's what they do. Some of those then work in television or in advertising, which is usually more lucrative part. Others work in screenwriting, distribution, cinematography. Some others work in the larger creative sector, so in music, for instance, two composers mentioned that. They work also as MCs or as DJs, work in the event industry or in theater. Others still somehow related fields like translation, subtitling, copy editing, but also quite a few work outside in more administrative jobs, so have office jobs, work in NGOs for film funding, legal departments, hospitality or graphic design. And a few also mentioned completely unrelated fields. So some work in health, real estate, retail. One does tattooing. Some in gastronomy. One in a film business, and one person even said they rent out their place on Airbnb. So that's how some of the talents try to supplement their income. Coming from that, we then went on in the survey to ask, so with the money you do earn, are you able to actually build reserves in terms of, insurance, a retirement plan, and every fifth talent, so 21%, said they're never able to build reserves. Then 2/3 together, so 63% said they can rarely or only occasionally do so, and only 14% say they're able to build reserves regularly. And that is then also quite visible in the next question we had, like, are you able to actually support yourself when you're not working for a certain amount of time? I mean, we are still living in a pandemic. In the first, second, even third wave of COVID, several people could not work, especially in the cultural sector. It was quite hard. And we asked, so for how long could you support yourself? And it was quite shocking that 16% said they cannot support themselves for longer than a month without a different kind of income. Only 26% could bridge half a year or longer. So that's 3/4 who are a lot more precarious there. Also here again, there's no correlation between country, contract form, or the department. So it's a problem overall in the industry. Another question then, from how can you live, how try to find improvements. We asked about professional training. If they had the money, would they actually try to invest that in further training? And a good third of the participants said that they are able to use some income and invest that in training. The majority, though, so 62%, are not able to do so. Also interesting what kind of training they would like. Several said that they would like additional filmmaking skills, cinematography, color grading, editing, also for an additional income. We heard about that. Development workshops, co-production practices with other countries, oral and pitching skills, writing skills, technical training, software, but also, and that's is what I find interesting also as a person working at a film school, that it's not just about the craft itself, but also stuff like financing, budget training, economics, marketing, legal and entrepreneurship, and networking is also not a surprising topic. Also, given the people we asked here that are, of course, interested in networking and training. The last two questions that I'm gonna tell you about. So we know that in the industry, you are kind of thought to love your job, and that's why you do it, and not to get rich, which we see is true. So what are then other alternative currencies? Like, what else do you gain when making a film? And we asked how much that is weighted by the talents. We asked about learning, connections, inspiration, satisfaction, and recognition. They were all relatively even. The highest rated was learning, so they want to learn more skills, add to their craft. But also, next up was connections. So since this is a project-based industry and you get one job from the previous and through people that you met, that is highly valued. A bit further off is then inspiration. They also had the opportunity in a free text field to say what they find important there, and they also value fun, collaboration, ethics, a potential to have an impact on society. They find a good working environment important, as well as meeting great people. So I think that's also things you probably will come back to. And then in going out, we asked, so what do you think your future in the industry is going to be like in 5 years? Is your situation going to improve, stay the same, or get worse? And the vast majority is very hopeful and think their situation will improve. And 78% say that. Only 17% say it's probably going to stay the same. And only very few, 5 people, thought it might get worse. So that is a lot of context, content to talk about. Later on, we also asked about, what do the talents think when they think beyond their own personal experience, what would be good in terms of create systemic changes, and we're gonna come to that when we talk to the talents later. But first, I want to talk to you too a bit and try to build a bridge from your fields of expertise, from your experiences, from your field of research, how you can, frame what we heard a bit more, since you're not necessarily directly working on the film industry itself, but I don't think that is necessary right now. First, I would like to ask Jutta Almendinger a bit more from your perspective as sociologist who is specialized in sociology of education and labor markets. What you know from your research, what the significance of education and training is in general for careers.
First of all, thank you very much for having me here. Thank you very much for this nice introduction and, of course, giving us the results, and even more so for conducting this survey, because we do not have enough knowledge on filmmakers, culture in general. And this posed a major problem during the Corona crisis, because we could not really press for progress. And we had awful life courses, in particular in this area of our employees and for part also employers. My second thing is hello to all of those talents in the world. I know that for some of you it's 4 o'clock in the morning, for some it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and this is really something. So thanks not only for participating in this survey, but also for participating here. I studied orchestras in 4 countries a lot, and the major question has been, do they need a conductor, and or can they do it all by themselves, being self-managing teams and things like this? But I never worked on this sector at all. So answering your question finally, I think first that it's really a pity that most of them are really working on quite unstable work, and it's not just the instability, it's also low income. I had the pleasure to spend a couple of months at the Thomas Mann House in Pacific Palisades in Los Angeles, and $1,600 is like nothing. Those people are really living at the beach and also sleeping at the beach. So it was very, very wise of you putting it into relation to the context. I also know that most of them do not have a regular contract, so it's trust, it's this waking up in the morning and then being hopeful while the phone rings, and then they depend on any kind of job, so they can't select. They're entirely dependent on what is offered, and this is for many of those people extremely harmful, because they have their idea of what they want to do. You also mentioned ethical things, which are important, probably more important in this sector than in other sectors. But they have to, just to make for the living. So this is one point. The other thing, which of course falls out compared to other industries or to other sectors of our community, is that they take further education so seriously. This was really astonishing, because I thought, well, what they say is, well, I need to have more money, or I need to have more reputation, or I need to have more golden handshakes, such that connections, and I know Los Angeles and how important it is to know the right people. But to say, no, I first have to invest in me, and this is an investment in oneself and in their own future, and to look for future and further education is amazing. And it's really, as you said, I mean, it's quite easy, equally distributed across, but this is far more than we have on the average, which does not mean that people in other sectors, like working in the industry, where you know that digitalization will change the jobs dramatically, wouldn't be as important, but those people do not see it. So my question then is, are those further education possibilities offered? And are they giving, you know, some sort of advice? What are the jobs which pop up, or what are the changes in technology? And it's a highly technological job, of course, as well, which they are going to need. Or are they doing some type of further education which probably does not pay off? But this probably the young talents can use. And if you allow me, I would like to ask one question. How to define young talents, so that I, as an empirically working person, know what's the basic of your inquiry and your research is?
Yeah, the talents logic is that this is aimed at people who are relatively new in the industry, but they're not just out of film school. They've already worked in the industry, they already set foot in there, they already made a couple films. And now it's the moment where you really need to decide, is that gonna be my real profession? Can I make a living of it? And so, like I said,
so it's not defined by age at all?
It's not defined by age. That's why we have a pretty big range.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking, obviously.
And 58. It's about a career step. It's about a moment in your career where you have already some experience, but really now think about where do you want to be. And I think that's exactly the logic of talents, and also for us now, in terms, like you say, what kind of further skills do I need? What is the next step? And the question you posed, I think we're gonna bring in later on again, which is exactly the question: what kind of education that they are looking for is offered, or how can, you know, what can the talents themselves mention to each other, and building networks and explaining what's going on, sharing knowledge. Okay, so we know education is important for the career steps to also hone your craft, move along. You also said technology is changing. Another context that came up in the survey answers was also education as a general factor for culture. In terms of, on the one hand, access to the profession, but also access to culture, right? Like what kind of, how is culture valued? Is that anything, is there something you came across in your research?
Oh yeah, we studied the importance of education widely, in particular during the corona crisis. So usually we tend to say education is extremely important for entering the labor market, staying in the labor market, and then exiting the labor market. So this has changed in general. So we now have not this one education at the very beginning, but we know, and we just talked about this, that we need to have further education. And this doesn't mean to do anything to learn a language or something like this, but really to learn a second job. And we were way behind in Germany to get the system straightened up so that it allows for it, that it pays for it, that it gives you free time. So we used to ask people to run into unemployment and then, well, probably you can do this, and then the reintegration in employment. But what we learned during Corona is that education can't be diminished to this entry in the labor market thing. It's not just knowing how to do your work. It's much, much more. It's how you can, relate to other people, how you can form a community, how you are sort of equipped to meet people who are completely different than you are, how you are equipped to overcome your stereotypes or your biases. So, as you said, education indeed means that you can sort of, relate to different cultures, to different people, and to use a big word, although it's used in every second sentence, diversity. So education and the acceptance of diversity and feeling well in a very diverse environment is something which we did know before, but looking at the development of our small children and what happened to them whilst they have been primarily at home over many, many months in Germany in particular, you see that they can't relate. They can't form a self sort of reputation, but they can also not link to other people in the way they could it a generation before, a couple of ages before. So this is important, entirely important.
That would have been exactly my next question. Like, how are there differences, or where are there barriers in terms of diversity, be it, gendered career paths, but also other kinds of diversity? Is there, could you talk a bit about what kind of structural barriers there are, and also maybe what kind of ideas there are to overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, looking at the results that you just gave us, it looks like being a very, very diverse field. I mean, you have a diverse range of age, you have a diverse range of gender, you have a diverse range of ethnic background, of countries, and in all of those things. So it looks very much diverse. But this is not the question. The question is whether you have diversity at the workplace and not whether your sample is composed of pretty diverse people. And there it looks quite different, because at least men used to work with men, women used to work with women. So this is very much homogeneous and not heterogeneous. And the other thing is that we hardly have age heterogeneous groups. This is another problem, in particular in aging populations. So it's an art, actually, it's a craft to bring people from different backgrounds together, but at the same time, it's a necessity. It's a necessity because we know from many, many studies that diverse teams create better results, and not just financially better, not just for big industries or something like this having a product. No, it means more innovative, more sexy, if you want to put it like this, more interesting. All of those things are highly important because people sort of jump at completely different other opinions, ideas. Young people have other ideas. They have other sort of fantasies of their life courses, of the world than I have. So to create diversity, and I say this, quite consciously, to create diversity is something in which we have really to enter, in which we do not do. We think that diversity simply comes. We are not creating places anymore where indeed people get together. They instead disappear. And indeed, referring back to Corona, this wasn't because people from very similar social strata are living together. They are not living the areas of those 2 or 3 streets. Segregation within cities increased. You are not traveling to your work anymore. You are sitting at home. So the social closure is something which is bad for individuals. It's bad for families, but it's also really harmful for societies at large. And of course for things like Europe, or we really want to think globally.
Yeah, and I think the last 2 years since we're, at Berlinale Talents, in the framework of an A-list film festival, a big educational talent development project now 20 years old. I think that's also important to look at, like you said, the way that Corona had an impact on making groups smaller, right? We're staying
more
home.
Similar. Yep.
At the same time, I think talent is exactly the basic idea to bring in people from all around the world, and even though they can't be here on site, which is super sad, trying very hard to still make the connection and bring people actively in to then build the networks that are a bit harder to build digitally, actually, than through encounters.
Well, there are some results out now. Of course, I mean, if you would know each other for a couple of years or something like this, it would be very easy to do it via Zoom or other digitally.
Totally.
I mean, very, very easy.
Yeah.
But to form new networks, it's quite different, because in this format, you really can talk about your data, about the survey. You can say, well, this is this, so, I mean, you can have an agenda, and you are quite efficient to work through this agenda point by point. It's not really a good medium to pop up with new ideas, to get friends, to say, well, shouldn't we meet? Couldn't we have a cup of coffee? I'm working in the science sector, and I can really see the signs that the networks of my young students and scholars, they do not increase at all. And I don't need any more new networks, so there is quite an increasing inequality.
Let's still stay optimistic. Maybe
yes,
later the talents can
it's
share
just
a
that
few
you
positive.
usually rave about homework and things like this, and in home office, and I think it's really detrimental.
I agree. Lisa, you're also a trained sociologist, and as we said, you're author of the book discussing the self-image of workers in the creative industries. So could you also, to bring in a bit your expertise, tell us a bit about the logic of the industry, which seems to hinge on systems of alternative currencies like passion, cultural capital, and so on. Can you tell us a bit more about that, what you have seen in that respect in your research?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to Berlinale Talents, by the way, to taking on that topic, and to, in that way, I think, in a way, taking responsibility for being a player in this culture where precarity happens and where inequality happens, and to not just stand back and give the stage to people, to talents, but to also say, no, want to look at that, want to understand what is happening here, I think is worth applauding. So thank you. About the industry, in a moment, but let me say one thing about the education topic, if I may, because of course, everything that was just said is true and important, but then the people that we talk about here, the people that have formed the survey, they already are very well educated. Most of them, you haven't asked for that in the survey, but from other data we know that most of them have a university degree. They have put years and years in training. And when I look at the biographies of the people that we talk to later, they've also started to have to put films out. So they have taken those first steps in their career already. And still, they can't live off that. Still, the wages are so low. Still, social security is often not an option. In brackets, Germany is different there, but maybe we talk about that later. So I think pointing them to education is not enough. So, but we have to. But because pointing them to education in that sector often means, well, you as an individual can solve the situation. You can go ahead and do something about it. And while that might be true in a lot of parts, we know that here it's the structure itself. It's asymmetries of power. It's the negotiation that is not on equal terms. It's about the non-standardized wages, about informal practices, about accepting those informal practices, etc., etc. So that part just,
but then we have to differentiate between education and further education, and I thought that we are primarily talking about further education. So keeping up with what is
well, in both cases, I think that just pointing them to further education as an option to better their situation is, in this very industry, not enough, because there's also the structure itself, where an individual being educated as good as it gets will not solve the situation, because it will be in a situation where his or her own negotiation position will just be low because of the way the industry works.
So if they're saying, well, quite a number of people say, well, they really would like to have further education. Then they internalize something and take it individually. What you are saying is structurally not given. Is that your point?
That will be a second point, which would go to your question. Now, my point just now is that the structural aspects of the asymmetry of power in the industry will not be solved by education.
Of course, I mean,
but by changing the structure, by changing the system. Also, I mean, when they say...
But that's why we have you here, also, well, not only as sociologist, but as the union person. Also...
Sorry, no, so let me there was just one aspect about the education, and not, I mean, education is great and important for everybody, of course.
No, you invited the two, right people, I mean, having, discussion now here.
But there just are... Yes, other things. But now about your question, alternative currencies, right? Mm-hmm. Well, who am I explaining this to, right? The talents know, and they said, you just said it, right? That they do have, it is, of course, it's about fun, it's about having an impact, it's about passion, people loving what they do, etc. And so you weigh that against financial, against financial income and against social security. And so that's what's meant with the alternative currency in the industry. However, first of all, when I wrote my book that you, in 2016, that you mentioned, I just came off film school. And the question that I just had that started this book project was really, well, how do all the other people do that? How do they survive in the industry? And do they have the same questions that I have, or don't they? And that's why I kind of remembered my sociological training and went out in the field and did those interviews and saw and heard and learned that it is an actual value belonging to that, well, people call it creative class, or whatever, doing art. Being part of the cultural production is great. It's wonderful, and it does actually do something. And if you can afford to not earn that much money, then you keep doing it. But that's where an inequality part comes in that really gets me, because either you. If that is the case, if you have to weigh those currencies against each other, then either you need a bread and butter job that you can live off, or you live really precariously and you see how far that gets you, or you come from a socioeconomic background where you can afford to do that. And we know from some data that that's actually what happened in the cultural industries in Germany, in one of the richest countries in the world.
So then how do we change that?
How do we change that? Yeah. There's a lot of ways to change it. I mean, obviously, if you have collective bargaining agreements, if you have standardized wages, if you have minimum fees that are put in, and if you have a funding system that is utterly transparent, then those things really, really help. So that is the way. That's the way. Of course, I really often hear stories, especially during the pandemic, that people have just acted great. Producers and directors and companies and employers have just done the right thing. They supported their people. They helped out. But that would always be depending on individual choices, and that would always kind of underline the asymmetry of power that is there. So yeah, collective action, I think, is the way out. But it's also something that is very, very difficult to do in a highly individualized market, in a industry where, especially if we talk about the creative heads, which are the focus of the survey, focus of the Berlinale Talents, it's a lot about you as an individual, about you in your, well, creative genius in a way. So to then stand back from that and to say, okay, even though, I am a genius and I will become famous at one point, right now, I'll go together with all these other people, I connect, I network, I share my knowledge, I'm building bonds to say, okay, what are the standards, what are the social standards that we want this industry to be based on? Making that step is difficult. And film schools often don't help here. But it, apart from you, Skadi, of course, but it's difficult at film schools because it is often the training is often so much about the creative output. Obviously it is, and that's fine. But then I think it's interesting that when I don't know where it was in the survey, but when you just reported that at some point people said, well, we actually want training on finances, on how to build a business, etc. That's often when schools come to us, come to the union, and we go there and we do these workshops and we start from scratch. So even though those people have been in film schools for years and years and years, they don't know the rules out there. They don't know what a contract is. They don't know what they have and what options they have in terms of social security, in terms of building reserves, in terms of calculating a wage. So what do I need, even though if I'm a beginner, etc. So there, I think the schools themselves can actually.
Yeah, and also I think one thing that you said about that the creative heads, so not only looking at directors and producers, but also head of a department. Yeah, also in the below the line departments. Later we have an editor, a production designer we're going to talk to. I think that's also important to look at how what you mentioned, transparency, and how do you think about how to calculate and look for your own job and the working conditions, but also as a head of a department, the responsibility for the rest of the crew, I would say, adds on to that.
Well, but then still, at that point, it will be. I mean, I think it's not a surprise that in Germany we do have a collective wage agreement, but not for the creative heads, but for people below the line mostly, and there are reasons for that, right? But for the creative heads, there's also one other aspect that I'd like to mention, just to have it as a keyword in here, and that's fair remuneration of copyright for copyright holders, because that is it's different than collective bargaining agreements, but it's something that's becoming more and more important in Europe and worldwide.
Let us finally get the talents in. They're waiting already. First round we have, so that we can actually get a bit more into the individual stories, and also not just their personal situation, but also several of them had mentioned really interesting issues, and also came up with certain solutions maybe. So first up, we have Karine Valauer, who's a director and also cinematographer from Brazil. We don't see the name on, so if you can wave when you're called up, that would be helpful. Karine, hi, welcome. We have Carol Ann Noronia from Pakistan. She's a producer and also director. Welcome, great to see you. Saleh Kashefi, an Iranian working in France. He's also director and screenwriter. Nice to see you. And Ili Fumbi from Cameroon, who works in the US as a director and screenwriter. Thank you for getting up so early for us and being with us. Nice seeing you. Maybe we'll start in the order. Karine, when you first heard about the survey and were asked about your income situation and the whole topic of labor, what did you think? What was the first thing that you thought was super important?
For me, two topics are main for this to discuss this issue. It is inequality and also education. We covered these topics like during this session, but I would like to share some thoughts like that I have.
Yes, please.
During the survey and also during the discussions here in the Talents. So in addition to the inequity of opportunities and lower salaries, projects with more men than women tend to be an environment for harassment, whether moral or sexual, and it affects the quality of our work as women, transgender, and non-binaries, because it makes us feel vulnerable. So there is a feeling that there is no matter how hard we work and qualify, we'll never be good enough to this industry, to this system, because they will find a way to pressure us through power. So when I think about solutions, the urgency for me is to have more balanced sets with more women, transsexuals, and non-binary people in leadership positions. But for that to happen, we need to think about the basis of the problem that for me is still education, because I am from the global South, and here education is a problem, because for me it's more an open context of education. It's not only getting graduate, it's about understanding the power structure, it's about understanding your rights, knowing your rights, and understanding your place in society. So this way we can like really change things. And yeah, that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you. Yeah.
Can I ask something?
Yes, please.
Karine, when you I'm just interested, what's your stand on quota then? Do you like to just say a certain percentage on set has to be women has to be, all these thoughts about transgender roles should only be played by actors that are transgender themselves, etc. There's this whole discussion. What do you think about that? Would that help?
I would talk about my experience because as a cinematographer, as a director, when I am preparing my career, like choosing who will be in place on my projects, I'm always trying to make a more diverse environment, because this way we'll have different point of views. We'll have a more deep understanding about not only the industry, but about our projects, how each different person can think about the issue we are discussing in our projects. So I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah.
And I would also like to step in. When you talk about inequality, are you talking about inequality within your sector, or inequality in terms of quite more precarious, unstable, harassed production compared to the outer world?
Society in general is still struggling with inequality, but I believe that in the cinema industry, it's like really clear that we still have that, and it is related to gender, it is related to money, it is related to opportunity, because when you think about opportunity, we know that most of money are in the north part of the globe. Yeah. And when we think about gender, we know that white men are in the power. So it's really clear, actually. You don't have to go really deep to understand how things are unequal. Yeah. So it's in front of our eyes. So for me, spaces like these are fundamental, so you can think about and also together try to find a solution to this huge problem.
Yeah. I think this is an extremely important point, that she thinks globally in terms of inequality, not just nationally. And we really, at least in Germany, we very much focus still on our situation within this country. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Karine. Carol, what were your initial thoughts, or like what's the most urgent topic that you also wanna share?
Well, I think in certain ways I really agree with Karine on so many things, because in Pakistan, or at least what we lack, is so much structure. So I think when I was just listening to you guys talking about unions and coming up with, educating people about their rights and about wages and about sustainability. So that is something that concept doesn't exist here. Like everything is done in good faith, right? But only those with privilege, for example, I might be able to, access certain funding, or I might be able to speak up about my rights, or be able to, say that, okay, I'm working more than a 12-hour day. But all our below the line crew, for example, they don't even have that. They don't have a voice. So there are quite a few times, at least let's say on my set, where I have to be like, okay, when we cross 12 or 14 hours, we need to pay them above that, because the concept of cheap labor over here is, it exists, and our daily wage workers suffer the most. So I think for me as a producer, one of the things is, okay, do I have to be an advocate for my team, especially for my below the line team, even if it comes at a cost of, let's say, letting go of some projects, So, because at the end of the day, it's just like ethics, right? Like, what do I want for the people who are working for me? So yeah, so I think a lot of the things that you guys are talking about, it kind of hit home. And yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's really something that cannot be stressed enough, that it's a collaborative work environment, that it's an industry of teamwork, and that everybody is not only responsible for oneself but for the whole team, and then in the larger topic for the industry.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it was really interesting, Carol, how you framed it as well, was that those informal practices harm people in the team differently, and that you, as a producer, have to take on a different responsibility in that than other people who aren't, well, as privileged as well in the hierarchy on film set, but possibly also because of your knowledge and background. So I think it's great how you that you matched those two points. Yeah.
Did you have
No, I just wanted to ask whether your budget, which is given to you, doesn't allow you to pay all people at the set. So is this a major restriction that those people who really give money for a given production don't even count all people, but take it for granted that you work for nothing, as we have seen in the data?
So basically, when we're given a budget, whether it's for an ad or a film, and like especially we sustain ourselves more through making commercials and ads, and not indie films or art house cinema, right? Because that concept, there's no real funding that comes in for that, or no support, or no external funding. So when even the short films, for example, that I've made in the last 4 years, these are passion projects. We don't expect to gain anything from it, but obviously we make sure that our below the line crews, our gaffers, our spot boys, our production team, they're all paid because they need to sustain themselves. But there's this concept over here that, these people should only earn, let's say, $10 a day, right? If I'm talking in Pakistani rupee, like 1,000 rupees a day. But when you really think about it, it's like, okay, how do you sustain yourself from that? That's not a sustainable model. So when it comes down to then saying, for example, education and rights, or like, let's say, giving them education, they also have to be able to avail that education, right? Or be able to fund it or pay for it, because that comes with a cost. So it's just like a bit of a clash of things that sometimes you have to figure out yourself, okay, how do I make sure that the team that I am responsible for, because as a producer, I am hiring them, I make sure that the costs are divided in a way that they don't suffer. Like 16 to 18-hour days cannot be done on a single shift of payment, for example.
Probably they shouldn't be done at all.
I really agree what you are saying, and I also cherish how you put it, but at the same time it's still a gig economy. I mean, they are working for you then for a couple of days, and then they are looking for other work, and probably this other work comes in 30 days later. So even if you pay the double of it, they wouldn't make it through a month. This is another question which has to be discussed, obviously.
Yeah, also because we're such a small industry as it is, it's not a very big industry. So you usually know that there are a few teams that shift around on every set. So that way you also know who's suffering on what end, or who's sustaining themselves on what end.
Yeah.
But that's a perfect lead over to Saleh, because he lives in France, and in the material beforehand in the survey, also you mentioned specifically the system in France of the intermittence. Can you explain that to those of us who might not know what that is?
First of all, I want to explain that I have just moved or taken shelter in France like in the past 5 months. So I am Iranian, and I have just moved here, and I am having paper problems and visa, money, and everything. But there is this thing that the French government has for artists called intermittence, where if you put on some enough hours as an artist, as a creative, especially in the media format, for in a year, like if you work, I don't know exactly some hours enough in a year, then in the next year the government will cover you for 6 months. So you don't need to work 6 months of the year, and the government will cover your salary. So it's like a dream. I don't know if I will ever achieve it, but I know some friends who are doing it, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that is one solution, right? It's only for thus far, as from what I know. For France, I don't know whether any other country has similar structures, but you know, that's one idea, to then try and look for a bigger support system.
But I mean, this was not too optimistic, Sally. You're saying, well, I'm not sure whether I'll ever make it. So it would be dependent on what?
Yeah, I guess because I'm worried about the different things than a French artist, being an immigrant. That's why I am not so optimistic. I'm just worried about what I'm gonna eat tomorrow. Then I'm gonna work or for like I don't have like a contract that will tell me I will be able to do it or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then
so
we are
that's why
exactly,
hope.
it's this very same point, you know, that you think this sector is nationally and not as an international sector, and unions should also, you know, be international unions and not nationally oriented unions, where the progress is not as big as we would have hoped to.
Exactly, that's what I also wrote, that like in a utopia that if I can imagine, there will be like a union of like these artists that I don't exactly know, but if there is like a international union between different countries.
Exactly.
There is.
Yeah, so.
I mean, there is. Of course, there are, unions do connect on European level and on an international level. And the ones, but I mean, so we, as Verdi, for instance, as the German union, we have very good connection to the French unions there. But obviously, for reasons that we all know, it's more difficult with Iranian unions because there aren't any, as far as I know. But still, Sally, so, I mean, your story, I think, points to two problems here. One is the problem of, well, society taking responsibility for its artists. And the intermittence system is one good national system here. In Germany, we have a very different one, but one that also works, right? That it's the KSK, very long German word, which is a social security system for artists, where they only pay half of their social security fees, and the other half is paid by the state and other parties, and that really helps them now to get through the crisis. So that's great, very different from the intermittence, but this is all national solutions, because those solutions are tied to the national social security systems, and that is, even in Europe, a real utopia to achieve at this moment, unfortunately, but that, you know, we have to put that down. But the other thing is that, what about young filmmakers who take shelter in Europe like you do? What is in place here, right? And there are, and this is another problem with another solution that has to be thought globally, and that has to be thought in stipends and in grants and in the community kind of, you know, bonding to say, no, we want to help these people to continue making their art, because otherwise we lose those voices. And that point, we're back to where Karine started. We lose that diversity on a global scale. So two problems with two, I think, very different solutions here. So,
I completely agree. And also something I want to say about diversity is like not only in gender or sexuality or race. I want to say diversity in background or like educational background or something, is that me, like that I have no education, I have not studied, so I am not kind of welcome. Of course, I come to Berlinale Talents or some this and this, but really is like I am not so much welcome in the industry, to be honest. And so it's also, I think, if there will be a diversity for different backgrounds and artistic styles and artistic practices and things, that not only that you should have this degree or you should have done this or you should go through this path and then you will be able to make a film. You should write this statement, you should make up these documents, you should prepare all of this, and then hopefully when you take those steps like a machine, and then you will make a film. Then cinema is now not much of a art form anymore. It's like a complete different thing, like, because they want the artists to do so many other things than to make art. So that's why a lot of artists who like to make films, they just get out of this path, because it's just really hard. It's really stressful for an artist to go through this path and write these things, do this networking, and is really a hard path, and especially for somebody like me that doesn't have the education. So of course, a lot of artists right at the beginning, they just get out of the way and they go to different practices. So that's also something I wanted to say.
So you think that it's not a selection of the very best who are going to make it, but a selection of those who have enough context, who have enough money from their families and have enough sort of educational credits?
Yeah, I'm not yet. I don't. Can you repeat? I'm sorry.
I think it's also more of a, like Sally says, it's harder to break into an industry when you haven't grown up with a certain set of networks like film schools already provide, because film schools, at least in Germany, what we know from research, is not just about the craft, it's about the network that you built into the industry already. And so that's, I think, exactly
but it probably also means that you have much more hidden talent, which you do not know, you prosper compared to others.
Exactly, which is also, I think, one of the reasons that the big network of talent is super important to build a different kind of ground-up network over the years, right? Let's bring Ellie in also. You are in New York, I think?
Yes.
So what would be your most important topic that we should also discuss, or maybe add to what has been said, maybe also?
I mean, I'm living in the States. It's I think sustainability for me was the biggest thing when I saw the survey. But just in touching on some of the stuff that's been discussed, I mean, here in the States, we don't have any of these social services. With the artists, don't have any security. There's no government support. You are basically on your own. And so for me, it's like, you know, film school was my way to find that, to find that community. But even film school, being able to afford going to film school is a huge privilege. And that's something that as I was filling out the survey, I was realizing of my friends who have not gone to film school, the opportunities that they have. I have way more opportunities than they do. And it starts at that level. And then I think at every stage of your career, you see the impact of that. You see the impact of education, you see the impact of community, you see the impact of, even when we're talking about standardized wages, who is able to join a union? Because here our unions, I'm not sure how it works in Europe, but there are these barriers of entry as well, and so that determines who gets the protection, that determines who is able to make a decent wage, and for those who are outside of that system, they're having to find, you know, they're perhaps not sure how to value themselves. They're maybe taking jobs and working for less wages than they should. And sometimes people don't even know how to value their work. And so and I think we see a big disparity of that with women and men. You know, I think transparency is a big thing. When we were talking about inequality and diversity, I think, you know, the fact that women are still being paid less than men for the same job, the fact that, you know, this is all hidden, you know, because these contracts are being done behind closed doors, I think that's a big problem. And there should be some sort of standardized wages, but it should be in the open. People need to know what to ask for the job that they're doing. So yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think that's something I would want to highlight again. I think it can't be stressed enough, the topic of transparency that has come up again and again, because one thing is, like you say, the contracts are made behind closed doors, but also probably in the US the same as in Germany. You're kind of trained to not talk about money, which is just harming us all, right? Like if we start to say what we earn and, makes it easier to compare and find a way to realize, oh, maybe I should ask for a lot more, because actually people get a lot more. So it is possible, while most freelancers think, oh my God, if I just ask for too much, I'm not going to get the job, and then I don't have the job at all. But that was also in the answers of in the survey by someone else who said they learned a lot from an open chat group within their department, right? Because they made a pact that they were editors, I forget the country, but that they started to tell each other what they earned, and that way made it a lot more transparent and easier to negotiate for everybody, so that also someone can't say, oh, but he said I can get him for a lot less, and then you realize, no, that was just a dirty trick. That's not actually the rate.
Which does not only apply to the sector. I mean, this applies to all sectors. Yeah. I'm not even allowed to talk about my salary, and therefore I'm always, sorry for saying this so directly, pissed off and telling me that I can't negotiate. I cannot negotiate as long as I don't know about what I can negotiate, because it's considered to be a secret. So this is a problem. But I really like this switch of transparency, not just to how much I earn, but also how good am I? So this feedback loop, that you do not know where you stand, your self-assessment, as she put it. And this is also something which some people have in abundance and some people don't have it, and therefore, they simply don't know how to locate themselves and whether they're in the right job.
Yeah. Thank you very, very much to the first round. Thank you for being with us and sharing. We're going to have 4 more talents coming in.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Have a good night.
Great to see you.
In the second group, we also have a few other fields represented. And it takes a bit of time. We're here technologically connected, so there you are now, visible to us. Hello. We have, and again, we can't see your names yet. That's why I'm gonna just call out your names and introduce you very briefly, and then you maybe can wave so we know who's who. Mariana Duarte is a Brazilian editor, also works as director. If I'm correct, you're currently in Scotland?
Yes, yeah? That's true, that's
Hi.
right.
Hi.
Hello.
Brilliant, thanks for being here. Then we have May Davies, who's a production designer and art director in the UK. Hello.
Hello, nice to be here.
Then our third person in the second group, Nolita Mkulisi from South Africa. You're a producer and also a screenwriter.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you for having me.
Nice seeing you. And last but not least, Stefan Malešević from Serbia, but I think you're in the Netherlands, right?
Yes, I've been living in Rotterdam for 2 years.
You're a director and also cinematographer. Okay, let's start with Mariana. Also, maybe to get into the topic, same question for you. When you first heard about the topic and had to think about it a bit more through the survey, what stood out for you the most, or what you would like to share with us?
Yeah, for me, like many of the things that you said were super important, but for me it was mostly about the image of that the industry has, like especially in my country. I can talk about it, about Brazil and about other countries that I've been living and working, like that there is this idea that the culture and cinema are not like an asset like for the economy, you know, something that generates jobs, that move the economy, that's good for the country as if any other industry. So this is something that I think about a lot, and also seeing my colleagues that were talking before, Saleh, and we end up leaving the country to go somewhere else. Sometimes we are trained and well trained at our own countries, but we go for other countries to search for opportunities. So this is not good. Like, it's good because we have like the whole global community, but it's not good for the country to lose their talents. And it's something I think about a lot. And how do we change this image, you know, of the industry through education, maybe through helping people to understand that cinema is an asset for the country, that's a real job, that's not only a job that we do for passion, but it also contributes to society, and should not be a privilege for only for people that have like economical background that allows them to, I don't know, not take side jobs or bad bread and butter jobs, like you said, and just dedicate to their art. So this was the thing that I most thought about when I was doing the survey.
Yeah, and I think that's something, I don't know how it was in Brazil, probably in Scotland, the same as in Germany. Jutta Almendinger already mentioned the specific impact from the COVID pandemic. At least in Germany, there was also this talk about essential workers, right? Who's an essential worker? And while everybody was stuck at home watching television, and it seemed to be an endless stream of entertainment available, to actually realize that has been crafted by people, right? That is their profession, to provide that kind of what then for most of us is entertainment, I guess, is something that stood out even more during the pandemic also.
Well, at the same time, we saw that this industry got much less supported compared to sports, where you opened the stadiums and allowed people, you know, to get in. And at the same time, museums and theaters and cinemas were still closed and much more restricted. So this really meant that we did not take it as seriously as other parts of our society. It's absolutely.
Lisa is a bit more optimistic.
Well, I guess the pandemic has, that is absolutely true, and it's shocking, I think. It's shocking that the culture is still being closed down while other things open. But at the same time, in Germany, and I know of some other European countries where the same thing happened, there was a realization that we have cultural workers and that they actually also eat and pay rent, which is astonishing.
Pay tax.
But yeah, even that.
But it took way too long. I mean, this makes all her points.
It took way too long. But however, there is something that can be that maybe can be gained from this cruel and awful pandemic. That some people realized that there are these people who don't work in full jobs, and to have an output that we all depend on so much. But I think, Mariana, everything you said is so important, but it's something that I struggle with myself, but how do we, I don't know how to achieve that, because you say that that societies have to kind of, how did you put it, the societies have to kind of realize that culture is an asset, right? Sure, but who tells them? Right? Who tells them? So I think, and now everything becomes so intricate and so complicated, because in a way it needs to be you guys, you talents, right? And it needs to be us, people like me who are in political positions. It needs to be someone like Frau Almendinger, who's really got a power in the society to just point to that on and again. And there is something that I need to just also, I know, just dropping that, so just that we have it here, because it's a problem of blacklisting. Because people in that industry, right? So if you do stand up and you point to that and you point to your value and that it should be, it might be your last job, might have been your last job, and that's a huge problem right there.
again, I'm the one who's trying to be optimistic and try to look for positive solutions, what we can do. And with that, I'm going to lead over to May.
Yeah, but just let me add one thing. What could be done indeed is that we increase the solidarity within the sector.
Exactly,
because
that's where we're going. That's where we're going.
Sorry, you know so much more than I do.
Yeah, because I have the cards, yeah. May, you're a production designer and art director, and I'm really happy that you're here because you also mentioned as part of the survey, and you sent your little guidance booklet through yesterday. Could you tell us a bit about that? Because I think it's a brilliant example of how to build solidarity within an industry, but also maybe use that to talk about the industry to the outside. Exactly what we mentioned.
Yeah, I think, so I joined so I'm speaking from the UK, and I think we're in quite a fortunate position in that the film industry is booming, which it means that crews are really hard to find. And actually that's kind of put an element of power back into the people working on films. And I joined our union in the pandemic, like a lot of people did. And there was a lot of activity around that time because obviously everybody wasn't working and there was concern about how we were going to go forward. And what I noticed I hadn't had a relationship with the union before, but what I noticed is that they were developing a rate card system for payment for the art department specifically. That's the part that I'm part of. And they separated the bands in such a way that was kind of 30 million plus for major motion picture, 30 million down to 5 million, and then 5 million down to nothing. And for me, I've kind of entered the industry through low budget and independent filmmaking, and it feels like there's a whole industry 1 million and below that I also believe is one of the best ways we can address diversity, because the barriers of making films at that level are much less than in the higher level. However, it is also possible that, dealt with in the wrong way. I think that filmmaking at this level can take advantage of people. It can, allow bullying and harassment. It can burn people out. So it felt to me like there was a need for a set of guidance for low budget coming directly from the union to protect something that can potentially be a really excellent training ground, an education route in for people that haven't come through film school actually. And although there is an issue that, if you are financially wealthy, you can kind of play in this industry. I think having myself, I've kind of come in through not having a film network. I started making short films as a designer while having a bread and butter job in hospitality, working in pubs and restaurants and teaching. And then eventually over the years, my bread and butter money is art directing. I now art direct on bigger films, but I still production design much smaller things that wouldn't sustain a living wage. But I kind of make money through art directing, which in turn helps me to see how things work at that level. And I also think there's a need for the kind of responsibility of the bigger budget films to sort of feed back into the smaller budget filmmaking industry, because that's where so many people come from. And there's, that it's romanticized to make films for cheap, but actually once the industry gets bigger, it's just completely forgotten. And I think there is a risk at the moment that those films aren't going to get made. And there is an element of the union actually that I've talked about in our think tank group, that if they set these rates quite high, the low budget industry can't afford those. So there's a need for a different framework and a different structure. So yeah, I kind of got together with a couple of other people on the committee who are interested in this low budget sector. And then we sort of consulted a few independent producers and tried to come up with a way that, a sort of crib sheet for producers and also heads of department to look at when they're kind of forming a low budget project. So educating about what the art department needs, because it's quite commonly misunderstood, and then B, looking at different payment structures like favoured nations or tier parity, which was something that was suggested from another country, which was interesting. So we have this, we're kind of tweaking it now, and then the union are really supportive and they'll kind of publish it. Whether people will then follow it is a step for the future, but having something written down is a good way to open the conversation.
Thanks so much for explaining that, and I'm sure that can be distributed later too, because like you say, I think it's super important to look at the different, who works in that department, and I assume that production design and art direction is not the only department where people don't exactly know what people actually do, right? And then also, like you said, compared to other departments, I think is also a super important step that you work together and not just in the individual departments fend for yourselves, but build bridges also across. So thanks so much for sharing that. The next up, Nolita. When you got the survey and heard about the topic, what is something that stood out for you most, or what is something that you would like to add that we haven't discussed yet, maybe?
I would firstly just like to say it's really interesting to have heard of someone like May, because the concept of someone like May in South Africa does not exist to me. I have had to work with multiple creatives, directors, myself included, which currently I think I'm working with about 5, quite continuously and regularly. And we've kind of come to the idea or the conclusion that we need to figure out very different ways to work. And that has included the artistic practice space. So a lot of the people that I work with are actually artists, or they're either writers, or they do things within the creative industry, which in some ways informs, the work that we do, which has to be quite limited in execution. So I wouldn't even have something like an art director usually on my production, because I have to think about money and the fact that I don't have that money to pay someone like May. So then it becomes a more of a collective engagement between all of us, where we have to sort of double up on the things that we do on each other's projects. And that in some ways has also been something that I found a lot of comfort in, because I have a background in advertising, working on productions, primarily productions that, come from the States, come from Europe, come from the UK, to shoot commercials, and at times, films, films that are not necessarily festival films, So I found that I was stuck in this rut, stuck in this terrible culture of practice and understanding of value systems. We value very different things, is what I came to understand working in the commercial industry, where it's all about money. And I think I get something very different out of this process. And so what I found working with artists was that they were given more freedom to express themselves, and not to find themselves in these scenarios or in these spaces where what you have to say doesn't really matter because of what position you hold on the production. So the way that we've decided to work from now on is honestly to keep it intimate, right? I'm one person working with so many people, and now I'm trying to find someone else to help with that, from an administrative point of view, because I'm also practicing in art, but I also feel the obligation to help all these other artists, because this is the issue that we have. We have a difference in ideas in this country, about how we think the cultural sector contributes to society. And it's very much a thing that's related to us South Africans and our history, and the fact that we come from a background that has a lot of fear of
technical cutoff. Maybe
that was
other issues.
I was just about to produce a film which was going to be funded by all of these institutions, but we didn't have the same understanding. We didn't have the same understanding of the work that we're trying to put out there, because there are institutions that believe that people should watch certain types of content, and we were being told to make rom-coms, and that is far beyond what I would like to do, in this sort of cultural practice. Yes, of course, I may have to do that in a different context for sustainability to make money. And when I'm actually talking to you right now, I'm about to go fetch my visa to move to Germany next week, because I've had to find a different place where people understand what I'm saying, as opposed to me being here and me being a Black female and me being the mandate for all of these institutions, but not really being allowed to say anything, not being allowed to say that, people from the places that I was born from a very rural, neglected part of South Africa, that those people don't have a frame or idea of understanding to take in certain types of information. And I think that's, a very, very different way of thinking. I also have to understand that this is all contextual, again, related to our history. But my sort of context of culture, context of understanding has to shift for a little bit in spaces where people will give me that kind of power, where when I come back, I can engage on these people on that sort of level, on that same level, because I don't see myself as someone who's engaging with people on that level. I'm finding myself, distancing myself from these people. And I haven't actually worked or earned a salary in the past 3 to 4 years, because I've been building this company and building a different idea of what I think a company is, in the space of, a film industry. I'm moving away from this idea of industrialization. I'm moving more into the side of, thinking and psychology and thinking about how we actually engage. And it's very difficult for me to find myself in a setting with like 100 people and have to sort of personally engage with them. So I have to figure out ways to compartmentalize that in a way. Yeah. And I know, because I'm working with multiple directors, there's ways to get people in, and there's ways to get people in who actually want to be there, who actually want to engage with the work. And I think that's what I find valuable in this whole process, right? But when we do that, the hope is to also, in this intimacy, get more sustainable income, get more sort of systems that will help us, maintain these ideas. So yeah, I think that's what I think came out to me when we had to fill out this the survey, is that I found it really necessary, because that culture doesn't exist here. We don't have unions here. Minimum wage in South Africa is like 350 Rand, which I think is maybe, not even 20 euro. So people can't survive here generally, forget artists. People just as a people here can't survive based off of that, that kind of income.
Thanks, Nolita, for sharing the point of how difficult it is to negotiate the different realms between industry logics, between different countries, and so on. We're really pressed for time. We're already over, and I also want to bring in Stefan real quick, and then try to wrap up. Stefan, since you're here, do you have something briefly that you also want to throw in? What do you think maybe we have missed so far, or something that you just want to highlight again?
Do I have 1 minute or?
Pretty much, 2.
Yeah. So I just wanted to touch upon something that Lisa mentioned regarding the unions, and because I come from Balkans. And I think we had a lot of experience of like successful practices from Western Europe being applied as like a blanket solution to Balkans and not really working out, like not in the film industry, but in political ways as well. So like, I think if we should press for things like unions and minimum wages, but just like May also mentioned, this like huge gap that exists between like low budget and really low budget and so on. We have the same thing in Serbia, that I think actually like if we would just apply a general rule of unions and minimum wages, that it could be actually counterproductive for the beginners industry, you know, because like, for example, for my first feature fiction film, it was firstly funded by Bosnia at the major national film fund, so like the main call, and we got 40,000 euros. You know, and like with this money, at the same time, there's like a commercial industry that's really well paid, which is kind of pushing the wages higher. And like the only way to do a film with this kind of money, of course, a couple of co-productions more, but it totals to around 100,000 euros. And a lot of debut filmmakers from my region work with this sort of budget. The only way to do it is to make people work for free. You know, it's not a nice thing, but somehow it also has to exist. So like just we have to be aware of that part, because I've been okay with like working for free in my first part of the career, and I wish like as it develops that it would move forward to like more paid jobs or like intermittence, because for me one of the major problems is like the gap. Let's say the fees are not that small, but like it takes so long to finish a project as a director, and then you cannot survive with this money, and then you're being pushed to work faster, and that's not affecting the quality of your project in a good way, you know.
No.
So like finding this balance for me, I found it through daily jobs. I worked like thousands, hundreds of jobs at different spots in the film industry, and also like whatever. Last year I was taking photos of protected buildings for the municipality. Just you know, just anything to keep my creative vision untouched, you know, so that I have complete creative freedom on that side. But of course, like intermittence would be a much better way, because it would allow me to spend more time working on my project, because you always sacrifice a bit of your time, creative time, to do bread and butter jobs.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's also another good point that we heard in between also already today. This, you know, straddling the line between artistic work and your passion project, and then the industry or the industries, and their different logics in there. I'm afraid we're not going to solve that issue today, but I think still was very important to mention all the different segments. It's a large field once you start talking about labor.
Can I also add something else shortly? I think like we've touched upon a lot of big issues, you know, like intermittence, unions, things that need to be organized on a state level. But I think for me, like one most important takeaway point from this that we can all apply quickly and easily is this, like being more open and transparent with our own colleagues about the fees. Because I also had a situation last year that I took up a job directing a sitcom just for the money, just to survive. And they asked me like, what's your fee? And I told them something that I thought was like exorbitant. And then there were two directors, and then the other guy was fair enough. He's longer in the commercial industry. He told me what's his fee, and it turned out it was 2 times higher than what I asked.
Yeah.
So if I was more informed, I could have easily gotten twice as much money for the same project. So that's just, let's be more open about this.
Yeah, thanks for that, Stefan. That's exactly on my wrap-up list. We already went over time. We already got an extra 15 minutes, and I'm very grateful for that with the topic.
Beyond the 15 minutes.
So just to sum that up, trying to really say it's a huge topic. It's about, you know, the social issues, the position of culture in society, larger structures, social financing structures, film funding. But like you just said, also thinking about what kind of suggestions and solutions did we find, right? Like, on the one hand, the value of diversity that Jutta Eimendinger also mentioned, that several of you mentioned, also the responsibility and, you know, what we can do in that, creating safe spaces, make a diverse environment. Several of you said that as well. You know, it can be done if we all work for that. Then again and again, the need for more transparency, transparent contracts, payment rates, and so on. Talk to each other, talk to your colleagues, not just about your craft, art, and stories, but also about your labor conditions, about your contracts, about the negotiations, right? Share guiding documents, like May, she, you know, developed something because it's important for her position, but it helps her sector and the larger industry to share the structural system and what can be done in that. We talked about education, developing your skills, and that on the one hand, that is super important to stay on top, new technologies, keep on developing at the same time. Like Lisa mentioned, that can't be all. Still, it's an important part. Yeah, I think the last piece is we should all try to work together in solidarity and not forget about our responsibilities. With that, I can just thank you all very, very much. Thank you, Professor Eimendinger. Thank you, Lisa Basten. Thank you to the talents, all 8 of them, Karin Wallauer, Carol Norona, Ellie Fumbi, Marianne Duarte, May Davis, Nolita Kulisi, Saleh Kashefi, and Stefan Malešević. Thanks so much. And of course, thank you to Florian and Cosima and the whole talent team. Thanks.
And to you.
Goodbye.